Good afternoon and welcome to the Prime Minister's Digital Town Hall. I'm Naomi Francis. Today, Prime Minister the Most Honorable Andrew Holness will field questions on the government's stimulus package on COVID-19, especially as it relates to workers and small businesses. Never before in our lifetime have we experienced a public health emergency on the scale that we have been experiencing today, especially in 2020. It's affecting every corner of the world, and certainly it is putting a strain on the public health system and economies. The International Monetary Fund and major international ratings agencies have said that we must prepare as a global family for a recession. You know, the Prime Minister made his budget presentation only last week, and I'll quote to you what he said to the Jamaican people, which is, as we confront our grave challenge with COVID-19, our ethos in 2020 is toward a decade of growth to anchor our peace, prosperity, and resilience. And the Finance Minister, Nigel Clarke, also closed the budget debate earlier this week, ensuring that there was an ethos, so to speak, in terms of generating that growth and optimism and hope for the Jamaican people. The Prime Minister is here. He has with him the Finance Minister, the Honourable Nigel Clarke, as well as the President of the Private Sector Organisation of Jamaica, Mr. Keith Duncan. Mr. Prime Minister, over to you.
Thank you, Naomi. Welcome, everyone, to the third in our series of keeping you informed about what the government is doing to mitigate and to address the challenges that we face as a country, as a people, as a society, as one Jamaican family, by virtue of this epidemic, the COVID-19 coronavirus disease. The epidemic clearly has a medical public health dimension, but it has many other dimensions. It has a national security dimension, it has a business dimension, and it has other impacts as well. Today, we want to focus on the business and economy, specifically our workers and our small, medium, and micro enterprises, and what the government is doing to assist, what the government is doing to support, and to explore ways that you yourself can take responsibility for your own economic security. And we have the Minister of Finance, who gave an excellent budget presentation covering very comprehensively all the areas. And I believe we can say never before in our history have we had such a budget where the government could actually make a provision. Governments have always been able to reallocate in a time of crisis. But certainly in my lifetime, and I stand to be corrected, I have never seen a government, a Jamaican government, being in a position to actually budget for an epic event or budget for a catastrophe. And we actually have made provisions in that budget. And Minister Clarke will give you an overview and some insights into the government's thinking and will assist you in navigating the access to the support packages and the stimulus that we have provided. I also have with me today someone who does not need any introduction, Keith Duncan, who is our current president of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. And he has been himself an advocate for businesses, small business particularly, and he will be having a forum, I gather, today, that you will go into even more depth in exploring how the business community can stay alive. Before I go any further, let me say up front, yes, the government will have to take serious, drastic measures to control the spread of the epidemic. But we are doing so in a smart way. I know, because I pay close attention to all forms of media, that there is a growing sense of panic. I think people are now resigned to the expectation that there will be a lockdown. And I have given some form of notice to get prepared. But as I said before, we cannot go into panic mode. Lockdown is not something that you do without fully calculating what the economic costs are. If we put in place measures that are appropriate to the stage of the epidemic, and those measures are managed, they are smart, they will keep us on a lower trajectory of increase. And I believe that that is what we have managed to accomplish. So I'm going to turn over to Minister Clarke to start off with an overview of the stimulus and support package.
Yes. Thank you, Prime Minister. So the government of Jamaica has put forward, $25 billion in stimulus, of which $15 billion is in the form of tax reductions and the reduction in GCT, and a $10 billion spending program to alleviate the effects of the COVID pandemic. Now, this package is directed towards those who need it most, those who are vulnerable, the businesses that are vulnerable, which will be the micro and small businesses, and the people who are vulnerable, which will be those who are on smallest incomes, and in particularly those who are in the tourism and related sectors. Our program is the CARE program, the COVID allocation of resources for employees. And although there will be businesses who benefit, the vast majority of the resources will be channeled in the direction of employees and channeled in order to benefit employees. And the CARE program has a number of elements, and I'll just summarize them. And it's based on a premise that we want to help businesses to stay connected with their employees, and we want to support employees who have been disconnected from their employers. So the first one I want to share is one that we call the Business Employee Support and Transfer of Cash Program, the BEST Cash Program. And what that will do is, that one is specifically targeted for the tourism sector and attractions and tour companies who have been hardest hit. And what we're saying to those businesses is, for every employee you retain who is below the income tax threshold of $1.5 million, which represents a vast number of employees in that sector, the government will transfer an amount of $9,000 per fortnight paid monthly for the months of April, May, and June. And this incentivizes those businesses to keep their employees on their payroll. They may not keep them on their payroll to the full extent that they have been paying them to date. They may not necessarily be coming to work, but as long as they're connected with their employees, they are paying their employees, and we have evidence of that in what they submit to the authorities, then the government will transfer to them $9,000 per fortnight based on every employee that they retain. The second program is called the Set Cash Program, which is supporting employees with the transfer of cash. And this program is for employees in any sector who have been dislocated from their jobs. And in particular, this is a program that will be accessible online, and tax information would have to be provided. So I know that not everyone, unfortunately, is on informal employment and in a position to provide those details, and we have something for you as well. But the SET program is for the persons who are formally employed and for whom their employers remit payroll returns on a monthly basis. And that is, so for those persons who are in that position and who have lost their job since the 10th of March and before the 30th of June, they will be able to, and they earn less than 1.5 million, they will be able to apply online, fill in necessary information, which we will match against information that the employer fills in. So we are in touch with the PSOJ, with the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, with all the umbrella business groups, and we'll be encouraging them that if they have to lay off an employee or terminate or make an employee redundant, that they upload the information on the employees they're terminating up onto this website through a form called a P45 form, which they should be filling out in any event. And we will match that against the applications that are received, and that will all happen electronically. And once that verification exists, verification that the person was employed prior to March 10th, and verification that the applicant has been laid off, then the payment will be processed and remitted straight to their bank account at the rate of $9,000 per fortnight for the months after they apply. So if they apply in April, they would receive the payment for April, May, and June. If they apply in May, they receive it for May and June, and so forth. In addition to that, we will be transferring to the Ministry of Labor and Social Security $1.1 billion for Jamaicans who are on the PATH program. And those on the PATH program know that payments would normally be received. There will be 2 payments in the period April to June. With this $1 billion transfer, we'll increase the number of payments between April and June by 50%, from 2 payments to 3 payments. And so PATH beneficiaries can look out for an extra payment in this April to June period. In addition, we will be supporting our micro and small businesses, which are businesses that have revenues less than $50 million a year. And for all of those businesses that file taxes in this financial year, 2019-20, and there's still time, the tax offices are open until tomorrow. So if they file taxes this year, and in those tax returns, they have payroll returns as well that suggest that they have employees. For each of those micro and small businesses, the government, on receipt of their application, which they'll also upload online, the government will transfer a one-time grant of $100,000 that they can use to tide them through this period. We will also set aside funds for the tourism industry, and in particular the smaller operators in the tourism industry. There are over 1,000 operators, whether it be small hotels or attractions or tour companies and so forth. And we'll be setting aside $1.2 billion for the hardest hit, for the most vulnerable of those companies to apply and to a COVID tourism grant committee, which will be a multi-stakeholder committee consisting of persons from the private sector, from the tourism industry, persons from government, from the public sector, persons from civil society. And in the application, the business will submit projected cash flow statements over the next few months. They'll submit some form of management accounts or financial statements. They'll submit a recovery plan. What is it they're doing? And importantly, that recovery plan needs to include support that either they're providing, that they're getting from their financial institution, and that a grant from the government would make a difference. Remember, this is a grant that they don't have to pay back, and this is taxpayers' money, so we would want these businesses to be able to substantiate that this grant can actually help them to get back on their feet and be in a position to resume. In addition to that, we recognize that there are several persons in Jamaica who are informally employed, and I know that the conversation will probably go in this direction in terms of the questions that may come. So just in summary, we know that there are persons who work in the craft market, for instance, who have no business now. We know that there are persons who work in the various markets across Jamaica, market vendors in Kingston and Montego Bay and Ocho Rios and Savannah Lamar who don't have any business right now. We know that bars are shut, and we know that hairdressers and barbers have less business and taximen have less people to transport. So we are working on a program for this broad group of persons who may not be formally employed, and we have reserved a sum that we'll be transferring to address this segment, and a sum that we can supplement with reallocations of expenditure. But basically how this would work, because it is taxpayers' money, it is money that belongs to you. It's money that you have paid over to the government. The government is going to give a grant to individuals that they're not entitled to, that they have not earned, but a grant due to the circumstances. It is the responsible thing to do to ensure that persons are verified. So what we'll be doing for each of these categories is working with the particular registration authority. In the case of market vendors are required to pay a fee to the municipality on a weekly basis, and all of those who are reasonably up to date with their fees will be able to make an application where they provide details on their trade, on their stall number, where they operate from, and we will match those details with what the municipality provides, and as long as there is a match between the applicant and what the municipality says exists, then a payment will be prepared. We'll do a similar thing with craft vendors, where we will be in touch with the municipality who offers the craft vendors space to operate. We'll have that list as a control list. Persons will be invited to apply. They'll have to provide their TRN. They'll have to upload a certified photograph so we know we have unique applicants, and other identifying information. And once there's a match between applicants who say they are craft vendors and they are craft vendors in good standing with the municipality, and the municipality confirms that, then a payment will be prepared. We are in discussions, with the Prime Minister. We are also designing an intervention approach to assist those who are in the business of operating bars. And here again, bars are required to have a tavern license or a spirits license. And we know that sometimes bars make the application, but because it has to come from a court, the application is not processed. So what we'll say is that all of those who have evidence of making an application, and evidence is in the money they've paid over for an application, we will get that list and have the unique identifiers for all the operators, not necessarily the owners of the physical structure. Okay, so the landlord of the bar is not the operator of the bar, and our intervention is for the operator. And once we can verify that the applicant is who they say they are, based on the list of bars in good standing that we can get from municipalities and from the court system, then a payment will be processed. The amount of the payment is not yet determined, but it will just be something to offer support. We'll do a similar thing for hairdressers and for barbers, cross-referencing applications against the licensed and fully paid up barbers and hairdressers as confirmed by the municipal corporation. And once we have that in place, then payment will be processed. There are other categories, and I'll just for completeness very quickly mention other aspects of the program. For students who have student loan, for the period April, May, and June, the Student Loan Bureau will be suspending the requirement for persons to pay over principal and interest for that period of time. But it's very important that come the 1st of July, that payments resume. But for the 3 months of April, May, and June, persons who have student loans can get a breather and make sure that they can adjust to this period. In the presentation, we also announced an amount of $200 million that will be transferred, that the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, led by Minister Audley Shaw and with Minister Hutchinson, Minister Green, that with a reallocation of expenditure there, they will make $200 million available to small farmers that could be disbursed in many ways. And a lot of things are under consideration. One of them is to use some of those proceeds to purchase crops that have been harvested for the tourist industry and that obviously can't be sold. For seniors, the Prime Minister mentioned a number of initiatives in yesterday's program. For seniors, however, who are in receipt of a pension, and normally if you're in receipt of a pension, you have to have a life certificate that certifies and verifies that you ought to receive that payment. Normally those have to be updated on a regular basis. We'll suspend the need for it to be updated in April for the payment that's due in June. So the life certificates that we have today will suffice for the payments up to June. And the Prime Minister mentioned the constituency intervention, and he can probably tell you about that. We have other initiatives, Naomi, but I think I would probably stop here.
That's what you call a comprehensive overview, Minister.
But very comprehensive.
Very comprehensive.
Yes.
Yes.
But even as it is, we are the first to admit that there would be gaps, there would be categories and persons who we have not touched. And that is a general situation with an economy like ours where we would not be able to. But I believe that we have done as best as we can. Suggestions keep coming in, and I'm certain that we're going to hear even more suggestions from the PSOJ as to how we could make this a better package.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Dr. Clarke, thank you for having me today. And if there is any point in time in our history that we need Jamaica to come together, is now. And we really need that all of Jamaica, whole of Jamaica approach, all hands on deck approach at this point in time to really navigate this crisis, this public health crisis, which has led to a fallout in the global economy, and this is going to have a significant negative impact on our domestic economy. And I think we really have to really appreciate how deep the problem is. And I'm really grateful that at this point in time in our history, that we have been able to get to a point in place where we're able to actually have a fiscal package and to have fiscal measures to address this problem that we have. Minister Clarke, you just outlined those measures, and they're focused on the areas of employees, businesses, small businesses, the informal sector, and small farmers, and so it's broad. I believe that we're going to have real challenges over the next 6 months to a year. These measures are for 3 months, and I'm sure that the government will be looking at it and reviewing from time to time. We believe that it's important that we find that balance between economic activity and and managing the spread of the virus, and that the term called flattening the curve. And we think that it's important that we find that balance, because we must find ways to keep our economy continuing to move, to continue to roll over and turn over, so that people can continue to earn, because there's going to be a significant fallout. So we sector by sector, the private sector organization has gone through, along with the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, to really look at the social distancing protocols and the public orders that have laid out by the Prime Minister, to find that fine balance in each sector: construction, manufacturing, business process outsourcing, to ensure that social distancing protocols are observed and people's safety are paramount, while keeping economic activity going. And we feel it's very important that we find that balance so we can move forward in that direction. So we appreciate the package. We appreciate that there are funds that are allocated to small and medium enterprises in the tourism sector and outside of the tourism sector, because the small and medium enterprises will face a significant challenge, because they are the most vulnerable. Because if you were to rank them by vulnerability, the corporates would be a lot more solid, the medium would be more solid, and the small and the micro would be especially vulnerable. So we're happy to know that funds have been allocated that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan, Prime Minister and Minister Clarke. I will tell you that all our platforms have several questions as well, and we do have some persons who are lined up to ask you face-to-face, sir, via Zoom. Let me start off with the questions coming from our Ask OPM email. There's also from social media, your Facebook page, sir, and Twitter. Let me start off with Peter Gay, who's asking, what about JPS and NWC?
Well, I think I can't speak for JPS. JPS is a private company, and they would have made their own announcements. For NWC, the focus right now is to keep the utility service up, to expand its reach, and to ensure that all the utility areas are properly served. And they have been doing that. I'm not going to here say that they are going to suspend their regular programs of lockoffs and so forth. But what I can say to you is that in this period of time, the NWC will exercise great levels of discretion to ensure that all Jamaican citizens have access to water, which is a critical utility at this point, critical utility. It is, however, important that every citizen also plays their role in turning off taps when they are not in use, making sure that you don't have any leaks in your home, reporting leaks so that we can conserve on water. So yes, the NWC will exercise discretion in how it conducts its normal operations in terms of disconnections and lockoffs, but it is also important that citizens exercise discretion as well. We cannot be wasting water in this period. So it's a two-way street. The JPS, as I said, that's a private company, and we will have discussions with them. But for NWC, they will exercise discretion in their lockoffs and their disconnections.
Thank you, sir. There are restrictions in terms of the number of persons, numbers in terms of gatherings. So we're using the technology. We have Mr. Christopher Zaka, the president and CEO of Sagicor, who is calling through the Zoom platform, sir, who has comments and a question. Mr. Zaka, good afternoon to you. Do we have him up on the screen? All right, I think we'll bring him up very, very shortly, sir. Minister Clarke, I know that you have fully and comprehensively outlined the plans, but people have questions specific to their business and industry. And again, Sharon, 652, is asking, how will the government be helping specifically bar owners? You went through that again, but there are several on all the platforms. If you could go back through that.
All right, so for the bar owners, what we want to do is to offer support in the form of a cash transfer. To make that cash transfer, however, we have to verify that the person who applies and represents that they are a bar owner, that person indeed is a bar owner who is operating and in good standing. I think that's the reasonable expectation that the Jamaican people have, and all the money that we'll be using belongs to the Jamaican people. So we have to, as good stewards of the money that Jamaican people have paid over in taxes, we have to ensure that persons who are recipients of this kind of support are indeed who they say they are. To do that, we're going to have an online portal where the bar operator will be able to put in their details, their name, the name of their business, what their TRN is, what their address is. They'll be able to take a photograph of their spirits license or their tavern license and upload it. If they don't have a spirits and tavern license and they're waiting for it to be processed and given, they would at least have a receipt of having paid for the license. They could upload that. Once we get that information, we will compare it with the official list that we would have from the municipalities and from other authorities. And once there's a match between an applicant and what the authority says exists, then the payment will be made electronically based on the information that's been provided. So that's what we do for bar owners. We're not in a position right now though, to say exactly what the amount would be, but that is how we're going to intervene to support bar owners.
Minister, I have a quick follow-up from...
Just to
Sure,
reinforce a point which will come over and over again. It's called Best Cash. And, you know, COVID care.
The care program is an umbrella.
But it's not free cash.
Good point.
And it's very important that the government is not giving away cash. And we can't in this period of time, because even in a time of crisis, there are corrupt people. There are persons who will seek to deprive others who genuinely need it. And so we have to put in place systems, and I have to emphasize this, systems that will ensure that genuine people who need it get it. And these systems will come under scrutiny. They may not be scrutinized today, but after we have passed the crisis, they will be scrutinized, and there will be complaints as to why the government did not put in place systems to manage the payment of taxpayers' resources. So the government is protecting against that. We're not putting up a barrier for you to access, but it is important that you know that this is not a giveaway and that we require you to establish yourself, to establish your identity and your bona fides for us to be able to take up taxpayers' money and transfer it to you.
Very important point, Prime Minister, concerning systems that will be put in place, because Faithful Citizen actually had a very important and interesting follow-up. He's asking, will the government look to see if these bar owners actually closed during this period?
Well, the police is doing their regular checks, and I have gotten reports. It's a very good question. I have to reflect on it to see whether or not we could actually check back on the police reports to see if someone actually violated the order, would they be eligible? And that's something that we would discuss, Minister Clarke, to see whether or not a violation of the various orders would make someone ineligible.
What could happen, Prime Minister, is that the police could they could keep a list, and they could supply a list to the authorities who are making payment, and anybody on the list that the police apply would not be eligible.
Yes.
That's one thing we could look at. But
but that's from a legal perspective, and we'll
Yes.
take legal advice, and that's a good question.
yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Ian Robb is asking on Facebook, what about persons who were newly employed about a month prior to the pandemic, and they've now stopped working because of COVID?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter. As long as they were employed before the 10th of March, it could have been a week before the 10th of March, as long as they were employed before the 10th of March, and they can validate that and submit the other validating information under the Set Cash program, they would be entitled to a transfer, a payment.
All right, fantastic. I believe now we have Mr. Zaka up on Zoom. Mr. Zaka, good afternoon to you. Your comment and questions, please.
the
Prime Minister.
So let me, those were very important comments that Mr. Zaka made, and I want to just endorse that the financial sector have stepped up in a major way that reinforces the depth and the strength of the social partnership in Jamaica and the social capital. Without the government requesting, the members of the financial sector came forward, banks, security dealers, insurance companies, and said, Minister, that reduction that you announced, we have been clamoring for it for a long time, for many years, and we are happy that the government finally did it in a way that we can pass on to our customers. But you know what? This is a time of need, a time of crisis. We want to give it back for a year, and we will, after a year, it will be reduced without the government asking, and that represented $3 billion that allowed us to increase the stimulus, the cash part of the stimulus, the expenditures part of the stimulus, from $7 to $10 billion. And I just want to publicly recognize the financial sector. Keith Duncan played a significant role in that. I want to thank him for that. Chris Zaka played a significant role in that. Thank him for that, and for all your members. I think it was a very profound gesture, and one that will serve us well over time. With respect to, so we at the Ministry of Finance and at the BOJ, we have done while we can't forecast exactly how things are going to unfold, nobody can. But what we have done is to do scenario analyses at various levels of intensity. What if this intense or that intense or that intense, right? What the impact is going to be on the various macro and prudential variables. And we have a response kit sort of lined up for each scenario. So we're not going to be in a position of having to react. We already know the kind of reallocations that we'd make, where we would move things from, how we would shift things around, depending on the various levels of intensity. And the good news in all of this is that Jamaica has options. Jamaica has fiscal buffers, fiscal reserves. Jamaica has monetary buffers, monetary reserves, and Jamaica is not alone. We exist in a multilateral system, and we have access to, we are members of the World Bank, members of the IDB, and so forth. So we have a number of options, and the work that we have done as a country over a number of years puts us in a position where we are much better off than many of our neighbors, and have options that we can rely on. So I just want to reassure the Jamaican people that this, we're going to get a pretty hard hit, economically from this, but the government, will be able to cushion to some extent, and with the view or with the aim and objective of ensuring that our recovery is as quick as it can be.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you so much, Mr. Zaka, for your intervention and questions. Prime Minister, Minister, and Mr. Duncan, really, this is a part of the frank discussion that we must have with the Jamaican people to ensure that we prepare them and open the lines of communication. Certainly, the Prime Minister and Minister Clarke has said that the private sector is really the engine of growth. We have Donovan Wignall as well from the Small and Micro-Sized Business Alliance that's also on the Zoom call with some questions to clarify as well in terms of the stimulus package for businesses. Mr. Wignall, hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wignall.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wignall.
Yes, sir.
true tax system for those who are registered. And this doesn't incentivize those who are not registered to be part of the family system. But even so, we would go further to make it possible for people who are not registered to benefit. And I just want to say congratulations. It drove really down into the medical sector and also very down to the environment, the hairdresser, to taxing it. And those are the people that we are with for money, they are quite units, and I just want to say congratulations for all matters.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Wignall. You had, I think, 2 questions concerning how funds will get to the hands of persons intended. If you could ask those questions real quickly.
Yes, I really have those questions, but we need to look at those goals, because I thought I heard that the funds would have moved through the usual AFIs and banks, but that is not so. It's going to go through the tax system, which where businesses are registered and we submit their returns, then that will be evidence enough that they are part of the system. And the ones will not be cash out the payments are clearly in percents, but it will be a credit to their account. So definitely that question was interesting.
All right. Thank you so much, Donovan Wignall there, joining the panel via Zoom.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have a lot more questions, sir, from social
So
media.
you're suggesting that we probably need to do a part 2?
I think we can take a few more and then we see how best we can integrate. So Patricia Hamilton on Facebook is asking, will public sector workers be given an extra allowance to assist through this crisis?
Okay, you know what? That's an interesting question. We will learn a lot about Jamaica during this crisis, and one of the things that we learn is that a job in the public sector is one of the most secure jobs that you can have. In times of crises, the persons who oftentimes are the least affected in terms of their income are persons who work for the government. In the last crisis that Jamaica had, even though lots of jobs were lost, not one public sector job was lost. And I think the same will be true here, that persons who work for government during this COVID pandemic, no one will lose their job due to the COVID pandemic. So persons in the public sector can just listen and obey the guidance coming from the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health, and you should be okay. You'll be receiving your income on the same day of the month as per usual.
Except to say that there has been some provisions made. I'm seeing where some people are saying it's not sufficient for health workers who are on the front line. And of course, public sector workers would benefit, as you mentioned, from what we have done with the NHD and other agencies as well. So I think we all have to be reasonable and balanced in this time of crisis to ensure that whatever we have can spread. I want to endorse what you have said, Minister, and what Keith has said, that it is quite a remarkable achievement for Jamaica to be in a position to have a fiscal cushion for a crisis. It is part of our developing fiscal discipline to be able to have reserve for times of crisis and for resilience building. But this is not to say that we have perfected it. And this is not here saying that every single Jamaican who deserves will be captured. And I think I have to say that up front. In between the aspirations and what we can actually deliver, there is a gap. There is a gap of implementation, and there is a gap of systems. We presently cannot identify every single Jamaican. So beneficiary identification systems are not as strong as they should be or could be. And what we are learning in crisis is that we need to be able to identify all Jamaicans. Very important. Of course, this is a plug, obviously, for the need for a national identification system. Without getting into the murky political waters around it, this is the real test of the society now. Are we able, in a time of crisis, to identify everyone? And the answer is obviously no. We don't. we have a large informal system, particularly that covers the bars and the people who work in the bars, the taxi men. It's largely informal. Will the benefits that we are proposing here, will it actually get to them? It's very difficult to say. If they become formalized during the process, as the Minister of Finance said, we are opening the door if they become formalized. But if they are not, it is going to be very difficult to take up taxpayers' resources, which are formally placed in the system, and prioritize those who are not formally in the system versus those who have taken the time to register. And those who have taken the time to register, we know them. So there is a system already in place to deliver the benefit. So I think this is now opening up the conversation. Why should we hide from the government? You should not hide from the government, because in a time of crisis, you will need to have the government's support. So now is the time for everyone to become formal. The government is not your enemy. You know, this is not Babylon. We are here to help, and we want to know every single Jamaican. So now is the time to get registered, get your business registered, start to file your tax returns. Let us know you, because it is when we are all known that we are best able to accurately distribute the very limited resources that we have.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. We have one from a young man called Bruce Burrows, and purchasing a home is so important to so many people, young people, and everybody who really aspires to that. So he says, as a young man who has just purchased my first home through a bank, and my income is being affected by the coronavirus, will the bank be giving temporary suspension on mortgage payments with no added penalties afterward?
Well, the NHD has outlined its measures. We have cut the rates, 0.5% for existing loans and 1% for new loans. That is a good stimulus. We're saying to you, even in the time of crisis, continue to pursue the purchase of your home because that's needed. Definitely keep the construction industry going. But I'll ask Keith to say what the banking sector has done.
No, the banks and the financial sector do realize that our customers will come under significant pressure. And we want to be able to bank our customers through this crisis and to get them to the other side of this crisis. And therefore, there will be several programs that will be designed, payment deferral programs, mortgage deferral programs, to defer payment for a period of time to give our clients and customers the room and the space to be able to navigate through the crisis. So there will be, extension of credit terms, there will be payment deferrals, there will be working capital support for small and medium enterprises, and there will also be waiving of fees and penalties, because we're going to face a significant crisis and we all need to emerge on the other side as much as possible. So the banks will be able to step up, the building societies and everyone will look to step up to see how they can support their clients by giving them the room in this period.
Thank you. That's certainly good news for so many people who are listening. But the main thing, too, is that they must communicate with their financial institution.
And one of the things, can I just add quickly?
Yes.
I know I have to be quick, is that we are doing a COVID cast today, the private sector organization of Jamaica, to engage with the business community, to let them, the small and medium enterprises especially, how do they engage with their banks, how do they engage with their landlords, how do they engage with their insurance companies, how do they have that dialogue so they can be proactive in working through this crisis and not have to retreat, but to be proactive and engage so we can design solutions to move forward. So that's at 4 p.m., PSOJ, COVID cast.
Very good plug.
So, I know we're coming to the end.
One thing that's very important, if I may, the Minister Mackenzie, on the homeless people, the people in shelters, and the people in infirmaries. As a part of the program, $150 million is going to the Ministry of Local Government for them to ensure that people who are on the street and homeless and in infirmaries have food, medicine, and what they need during this period.
I'm glad you raised it, because Minister Mackenzie sat right there yesterday and fielded many of those questions, and I did promise that we would say more about how they would be funded. The mechanisms are in place. through the Ministry of Labour, through the Ministry of Local Government, through the poor relief departments that are attached to the municipal corporations, and they will be provisioned, as I said. Minister Clarke has now explained the actual extent of the provision to be able to respond. So I wanted to take the last 5 minutes.
If you could, just before, because I'm seeing on several of our platforms where persons are asking about contract workers, security guards, and of course domestic workers, if there is anything there for them as well. As we close, then we can do that.
So the similar principle will apply. You know, persons who have lost their jobs due to COVID, we just have to come up with the verification mechanisms. These programs will be open in April, by the 9th of April. So we do have some time to work out the details for every single category. The means of verification will differ from category to category, but the spirit, the intent, the care, and the caring will be the same across categories.
Thank you so much, Minister. Prime Minister.
So I wanted to just take the last few minutes to just go through where we are in relation to the current epidemic and to place us in a kind of global context. Last time I didn't have the charts up, so many persons who were watching couldn't relate to what I was saying because the graphs were not in front of them. But this is where we are. We are now at 26 cases. This graph is saying we're at 25, but one additional case has been confirmed. So just to go back to that graph, the blue bars show the new cases as they are confirmed on a daily basis, and the orange line shows the accumulation of cases, the total cases. So you can see we're rising, but in a fairly flat trajectory. And you will see what I'm saying when we go to the other graph showing where we are relative to other countries. Now, on this graph, if you're seeing it, you're seeing 4 countries selected. And we've selected them by virtue of population and by virtue of the area, the Caribbean area. So we have selected Panama, and the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica, which are all within this region. And then we have selected Singapore as a case study of a country that has implemented various measures on a similar path as how Jamaica has implemented control measures. So if you look, by the way, this graph shows the number of cases per 100,000. So it is basically equalizing for population. So if you look at the blue line, that is Panama. Panama currently is in day 16 of the outbreak. That is 16 days from the first case that is confirmed, and they now have 443 cases. Jamaica is in day 16 as well of our outbreak, and we have 26 cases confirmed. The Dominican Republic, I believe, was the first country to report a case in the Caribbean. And they are in day 24 of their outbreak, and they have 392 cases. Singapore is in their 64th or 63rd day of the outbreak, and they have 641 cases. So they have been going through the epidemic now for 63 days. And they have essentially put in place measures along the lines of measures that Jamaica has put in. So we have not, in the first phase, put in place drastic measures such as a lockdown. We have progressively increased the measures relative to the number of cases that we are seeing. So if you look at, for example, Panama and the Dominican Republic, you will see what I've always been saying, that you're going to enter a phase where the numbers will rise. What we don't want is for the numbers to rise as sharply as they are rising in these countries. Now, there are many things that could cause the numbers to rise, but you could really lump them together under one. the cases will rise if the public does not change behavior. So in the case of the Dominican Republic, it is fairly well documented that they got a bulk of their cases from a wedding that took place and from a fundraising dinner that took place. In Jamaica, we have a cluster that resulted from a funeral. Granted, it was at the start of the epidemic when people didn't really know. Now, the government has paid great attention to providing you with the information so that you know. Now, I understand the Jamaican psyche. There are many people who will say, sure, I go through worse than this. Nothing can happen to me. Sure, it's God time. Sure, me can't bother. Well, if it were the case that it would only affect you, then as we say, it would be bad and not so bad. But the truth is, it affects everyone. So your weak fence behavior will cause your grandmother and your neighbor and the people in your workplace to be ill. So we have to change behavior. So no matter what the government does, no matter how many orders we pass, no matter how much enforcement we do, if you resist and say, I don't care, and I feel sick and still go to work, still take the taxi, if you know that you came into Jamaica from a country with community spread, and you still feel that you have to go to the supermarket and go and check your friend and go and look for your girlfriend, and you know that you could be exposed and you don't stay in the 14 days quarantine, then you are placing the entire population at risk, and that upsurge could be what happens to us. Now, the upsurge in some countries might not be a challenge because maybe they have enough beds and enough ventilators so they can treat with it. But if we were to move to the graph which shows you what the span, and before we shift, just to be clear, Singapore has been putting in measures, and that is why you notice that their graph has been increasing but not so rapidly over a short period of time. So let's move to the other graph. This is a graph showing the profile of the epidemic in China. So China really started to experience cases as early as in December. But let's say January 19th would be when we started to have cases going up into the 10s and 20s and 30s. Notice the rapid rise in new cases and the rapid rise in cases under treatment daily. So it took China from the 19th of January, they had a lockdown on the 23rd of January, and even with the lockdown in Wuhan in place from the 23rd of January, the peak was not reached until somewhere around the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th of February. So going into a lockdown with the most extreme measures, it would still take some time to bring the epidemic under control. So you would be looking at several weeks before you would have this under control. So almost a month. To come totally out of the epidemic, just looking at China's progression out, it's not until somewhere around the 15th of March to present that we're seeing China having cases that are below 100, below 50 per day. So the epidemic could last for a period of 8 weeks, it could last 2 months, probably a little longer. The challenge, of course, is what happens to other countries around us. We have closed the border. We can't close the border forever. But if countries around us don't get the epidemic under control, you could have a resurgence of imported cases. So we are paying close attention to what is happening in New York, what is happening in Miami, what is happening in the United Kingdom, and Canada, where we have a large inflow of our visitors and citizens who come, because we have to be making decisions based upon what is happening in other countries. So there are a lot of moving parts, and as I said earlier, there are a lot of people who say, let's go into lockdown. But if you go into lockdown too early, the question is, can you sustain it? People still need to eat. They still need to have, movement. So it's something that we have to be thinking about very carefully. At this point, what I want the nation to focus on are the orders that we have already given. Let's perfect those. Let's perfect the social distancing. Let's perfect the hand washing. Let's perfect the sanitizing of the hands and the sanitizing of the surfaces. Let's ensure that our senior citizens are adequately protected. We're not isolating them. We're asking them to stay at home. Please call them, check in on them. Volunteer to bring their groceries and get their medicines so that they don't have to come out. This is a time when we all have to be our brother's keeper. All these measures can help to keep the curve flattened. So let's move to the other graph. So if you look at the purple, then you would say that countries like the Dominican Republic and Panama, their trajectory would be more along the lines of what is in the purple curve. Jamaica would be more along the line of and Singapore, along the green curve. But it could change. It could change rapidly, because if you look at the graph for the Dominican Republic, they were actually tracking very well on the lower curve. But suddenly, when the Dominican Republic put in place a curfew, there was resistance by the public. People still decided to go about their business as normal. And that is the consequence. So it all depends on what we do. We are trying to flatten the curve. We will see a rise, but we want to keep the curve within the capacity of the health system. Within the capacity of the health system. We have done a projection. We have figured out the number of beds we should have in the probable case that will happen. If it goes more than that, then we will have another kind of crisis on our hands. Very important point made by Keith. We are not placing a dollar value on any life. Every life is important. But in order for the government to be effective in protecting your life, we still need to have revenues. The money that will be given in our various support and stimulus package, this is not money that is sitting down somewhere free. There might be a little reserve, but not enough. The truth is, it is all projected on the revenues that will come in from the taxes that you pay and the economic activity that you do. So cutting off economic activity lessens the ability of the government to actually spend on increasing the capacity of the healthcare system. So government has a tricky balancing act. How do we ensure that we have the healthcare, we have the support, we have the stimulus, and at the same time put in place measures that will limit movement, limit social interaction in terms of social distancing, quarantine areas without shutting down businesses. So it's a very difficult balancing act. I'm not saying we have gotten it right. We're listening to what you're saying. We have put out some orders, and I know people have been sending me notes, for example, about supermarkets having people line up outside. Now, supermarkets and other establishments of that nature, markets and food establishments, what we have said is that they must maintain the rules around social distancing. So if you have a hall of this size and you are serving customers, you may have more than 10 persons in this hall, but you don't want them to be in close proximity, meaning less than 3 feet, 3.5 feet. I say make it 6 if you can, but no less than 3. as long as they are out and everybody is observing, if somebody feels like they have to sneeze, they have a rag or a kerchief close by, leave the room. That you put in place the sanitization, that there's a sanitization station at the entrance, these kinds of measures. But this is just for the essentials of life, which would be a supermarket where people can get food, a pharmacy where you can get medicine. Other establishments, we require you to do similarly, to do likewise, especially in the BPO sector. Maintain the hygiene requirements, maintain the social distancing requirement. Don't take it for a joke. Someone yesterday sent me a picture in a BPO operation where everybody was at lunch quite fine, sitting in close proximity to each other. Schedule your lunch breaks so that you know that you don't have a crowd anywhere. It is these kinds of social behavior change that will flatten the curve. So I believe I've taken up a lot of time explaining this. It can't be said too many times, and I will keep saying it, but I hope that we have answered some of your questions and would have alleviated any fear or panic that may exist. Again, about a lockdown, we're not there yet. We're watching the situation very carefully. Rest assured that if it is needed, we will. But at this stage, I believe we have, based upon the figures, if figures could come out later on today and the situation changes. What you should know is that you have a government that is monitoring almost hourly. And we meet twice a week as a cabinet to review what is happening, and we meet on the weekends as well remotely to review. So we could change immediately. But as the Minister of Finance said, in looking at the financial package, there is a stress test done on the system, and we have looked at various scenarios, and we have various response kits for various scenarios. It's the same thing for the management of the epidemic. We look at the various scenarios. There are various triggers that are in place. If those triggers are met, then we escalate the measures. What we ask of the public is to listen closely to what the government is saying, follow the advice that is given from credible sources, and make the necessary behavior change. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will get through this crisis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clarke, and Keith Duncan, the President of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. This was, in fact, a very useful, very, very important discussion that the Prime Minister has ensured that he has, not through any intermediary, but directly with you, members of the public, Jamaicans, who must certainly arm themselves with information to ensure we do get through this together. Thank you so much for joining us on our digital town hall. Certainly, once the Prime Minister says he needs to talk again, we'll be right back here to ensure that he fields your questions and deals with all of your concerns. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Have a good day.